So when I was growing up, my neighborhood, the neighborhood I grew up in, they had a decent number of kids my own age. My older brother, he was about 2.5 years older than me, and so most of the neighborhood kids were his age, not necessarily my age. And I don't know if we ever really got super close with any of the neighborhood kids. We certainly were able to play and have some fun with them, but I think most of the neighborhood kids kind of saw my brother and I as this brother duo that you might recognize from The Simpsons. You guys know who these guys are? That's Rod and Todd. Rod and Todd. Now, if you're not familiar with The Simpsons, that's okay. Just to kind of give you some reference here. So Rod and Todd were like the weird Christian kids who lived next to The Simpsons. And that was kind of me and my brother, I think, and in the eyes of a lot of people, or at least the neighborhood kids, because we didn't swear, like we didn't cuss. We typically did not talk about girls the way they were talking about girls. And I would say about half of the jokes, like we just didn't get. Like they're cracking up laughing. We're like, I don't even know. I don't know. That's probably some sort of cultural reference like we're just missing. And so we were kind of Rod and Todd, but at the same time, we were still invited to do some of the fun things because we were decent at playing street football. Like we were decent at skateboarding and basketball and even fighting. Now, let me clarify when I say fighting, because there's the fighting, hey, I've gotten really angry, I've got, rage-a-hall going on, and I'm just going to beat you to a bloody pulp. That's not the fighting. That's not the fighting that I'm talking about. I'm sure that went on in the neighborhood, but that's not what we were involved in. We were involved in we're hanging out, and, someone calls you out. Some of you guys, you know what I'm talking about? When you're growing up, it was hey, let's see who's stronger, let's see who's tougher. And so you've got a peer referee, and you guys get to go at it, but it's got to be a nice, clean fight. No punching to the face. Everybody knows you can't punch to the face, because if you punch to the face, mom and dad are getting involved, and then Fight Club is disbanded. And so that's how we fight. Any of you guys, you know what I'm talking about when I'm saying fight? Okay, so there's a few hands. I appreciate that I'm not the only one who got into that when I was younger. I remember this one day, though. We were in our front yard. This was oftentimes the location of Fight Club. And there was a kid who calls me out. And he's about a year older than me, but he's my size, so it was going to be a fair fight. Most of the guys, they were older than me. He had an older brother named Luis, who he was top dog. Like Luis, he was meaner than all the other guys. Not quite bigger than all the guys, but because he was so mean, it was like no one's going to mess with Luis. And so his younger brother, Pablo, calls me out, and I think, I can potentially take Pablo as long as it's not Luis. And so as these fights typically get started, it's some shoving, right? It's some trying to grab and seeing if you can throw. It's the exploratory stay away from me kicks. And then eventually this thing goes to the ground. And we're grappling, trying to get position, and I realize this is useless, and so I pop back up, and I notice that Pablo, he's a little slow to pop back up, and so I go ahead and grab him around the waist, and I lift him up and do in what I imagine is just the perfect suplex, boom, down to the ground. Now, I have to admit, that's how I envision it in my brain. But if you ever talk to a guy about their fights, every single guy I've ever met exaggerates their fights to a level that it's just a lie, right? It's just a lie. Did you see what I did? I was like, yeah, I saw what you did. You did one of these things, and you thought that was So I don't know if it was as beautiful of a suplex as I thought it was, but at least got the oh from the other guys. I drop Pablo, and everyone's like, oh. But the O doesn't last very long, because seconds later, Pablo lets out a blood-curdling scream of pain. Ah! And so the O's go to shh. Because if you've ever had the Fight Club thing in the neighborhood, you know that if you get hurt in Fight Club, you've got to handle your business, right? You can't be crying and whining, because who's going to get involved if you start crying, screaming, and yelling? Mom and dads are going to get involved, and it will shut down Fight Club. And so everyone's like, shh. So Pablo settles down, but he does not remove himself from the fetal position that he's in on the ground. Instead, he's holding his arm, and he's whimpering like a kicked dog. And I realize, this is serious. And so what do? Well, I speak the words that I know will heal Pablo immediately. And so I speak the words that you've probably spoken. I say, I'm sorry. It was a accident. You're okay, right? You're okay. And sure enough, he just stays laying on the ground, and everybody knows it's a really big deal, because his older brother, Luis, the mean guy, The one I don't want to mess with, he actually has to scoop poor Pablo off the ground and literally has to carry him home. And so all the guys are like, oh my goodness, no one has ever had to be carried off the mat. This is a big deal. So I try one more time. I'm sorry. Hey, it was an accident. We're okay, right? Luis turns and he gives me just daggers, right? Fierce daggers. He says, you better hope he's okay. And I look and I'm like, I'm pretty sure Pablo is not okay. Like I'm looking and you are carrying him home. He's not okay. So does this mean like FBI witness protection program for the next 25 years of my life? I don't know where this is going to end, but I don't think it's good for me. Next day rolls around. I'm in my front yard with my brother, and the neighborhood kids, we notice, are starting to come up the street, and who's at the head of this pack of guys? It's Luis, and he looks angry, and I look behind him, and Pablo's there, and what's Pablo got wrapped around his arm? It's a cast. And so I realize, should I just run and hide now? Because I think I'm a dead man. We wait, he gets up there, and I look at Pablo, and I just say the stupidest thing that came out of my mouth was, oh, did you break your arm? And Luis reminds me in that moment, he didn't break his arm, you broke his arm. And if you ever touch my brother again, I will kill you. So that's where it ended. I'm still here today, so it was hopefully, I never touched him again. I'm still living. But this story illustrates the third core dynamic that we've been talking about, these three core dynamics for the past 3 weeks, having to do with our series, Every Word Matters. And today we're going to get into the third one, but it illustrates so plainly this third core dynamic, which we're going to get to. But let me just, as review, if you're new to the series, week 1, we explored how there are two frequencies that are at work, that are actually at war with one another. There's a frequency when it comes to communication, when it comes to language, when it comes to our words, that really is the frequency of God. Think about how God communicates. When God communicates and speaks, he creates things that are good, and he creates things that are a blessing. That's the frequency of God. And then you have the frequency of the enemy. You have the frequency of the enemy where he lies and he tries to shame you. He tries to find all kinds of false guilt in your life, and it brings death into your life. And so those are the two frequencies, and we have to ask ourselves, like, what frequency are we typically communicating with? And then week 2, we started with the first core dynamic, which has to do with not every word weighs the same. Like, there are certain words that just weigh more than other words. What are the words that just weigh more than your average word? Negative words weigh more than positive words. And so we encourage you, challenge you to load up on those positive words. And then last week, we talked about how the source of words determines impact. Source determines impact. What does that mean? It means that sometimes it's not so much what is being said, but who's the one that is actually saying it. We think about in our work relationships. You got a coworker that communicates something to you, it's like 10 pounds. Yeah, there's some weight to it. But your boss communicates to you, well, that's 100 pounds. You're talking to somebody in the neighborhood that you don't really know much, 5 pounds, whatever they happen to say. But when your husband or your wife or your mom or your dad communicates, maybe the same exact words, it weighs like 100 pounds. Source determines impact. And so as followers of Christ, we ask ourselves the question, our words, because we have the Holy Spirit living inside of us, our words make impact in people's lives. And so are we communicating with salt and light? Are we communicating in such a way that actually is protecting, preserving, making life palatable, bringing light into darkness, or are we not? And so that leads us to this week, and we're going to look at the third core dynamic when it comes to communication, and that is, and if you want to take notes, you can, damage is immediate, but healing takes time. The damage of our words, it's immediate. But the healing of those words, that requires time. Now, I think we recognize this immediately when it comes to our physical world. I break Pablo's arm. The damage is what? Immediate. It's broken. But the healing is going to take time. You know how much time it took? Well, the doctors had to reset that thing, and then 6 weeks in a cast. That's how long it took for that to be healed. Have you ever broken a window before? Anyone? Throwing the baseball around? Damage is immediate. Glass everywhere. But the replacing of that window is going to cost you at least 2 hours, probably more. It's going to take time. Have you ever potentially broke someone's collectible or damaged somebody's collectible baseball card collection? Maybe someone's really into antiques. Maybe it was their good china, right? The damage is immediate, but if you're going to replace that really valuable piece of antique, I mean, you're going to spend like 2 weeks on eBay trying to find just the right, it takes time. And let me ask you this. Does an explanation like immediately either heal, repair, or replace what was broken? If someone gives you an explanation, does it immediately take care of all that? When I went to, Pablo, hey, here's my explanation. It was an accident. Did that miraculously heal Pablo? No, it didn't. When someone gives you an explanation, well, me and my brother, like we were throwing football in the kitchen, and I know we weren't supposed to do that, and it hit your good china, and I'm really sorry, it was a football game. Does that explanation really help? Sometimes it just makes it worse. Because mom has told you 1,000 times, do not throw the football in the house. And although we understand this dynamic when it comes to our physical world, sometimes we ignore it or we dismiss it when it comes to the words that cause so much damage. We'll say things like, oh, well, you know what? Let me just make the apology. Let me go ahead and just explain to you what's going on. And we think it magically is going to heal things. For a moment, I want you just to think about some of the damaging words that people have spoken into your life for a moment. Have you ever had somebody that meant something to you, and they looked at you and said, you are such a disappointment? Whew. Guys, damage is immediate, isn't it? Have you ever had somebody look at you, maybe it was a spouse, and you were just acting a little crazy, and they said, you were just like your mother. You were just like your father. And the damage is immediate, like, no, because, well, it's Father's Day, so I'm sure your fathers were great. But in this context, like they're not that great, and so it hurt a little bit. Or, have you ever had someone tell you you're ugly? You ever had someone tell you you're fat? You ever had somebody tell you you're dumb? Right? The damage is immediate. And oftentimes what takes place, just again, think about those moments in your own life when someone has spoken something that has damaged you. Sometimes it's obvious that they just damaged you because of your reaction, because of your facial expression, and they realize, uh-oh, I broke the window. And in those moments, what do these people typically do? What they do is they try to back away from those words and they try to explain. They try to give you an explanation. They try to give you an excuse. Oh, okay, wait, I didn't actually mean to say what I said. I know, I said this, but what I really meant to say was this. Let me give you the explanation and it will make it all better. Okay, it's been a really tough week. And I'm just so stressed out, and it's the lack of sleep that's talking. Oh, no, you're upset? No, that was supposed to be funny. You're supposed to be laughing, not crying right now, right? An explanation is what we usually receive, but does that mean we're automatically healed? No. We know that the damage can be immediate, but the healing requires time. And at this point, I just want to kind of pause, and I want us to kind of recenter where we're headed today. Because every single week in this series, I've talked with at least a few people after the service, and they've shared some insights with me about their own relationship struggles. And they've shared with me maybe some words that were spoken over them and the damage that it caused. And so what I want us to understand is healing is available. Like Christ is able to step into our brokenness, and he's able to bring healing. And I hope that maybe this series is helping with a little bit of that for you. But if I'm honest with you, that's not the purpose of this series. That's not certainly the purpose of this lesson. Hear me on this. This lesson, where we're headed, it's actually not for the person next to you. What I'm going to be talking to you, what I'm going to be preaching about, it's not for the person in front of you. It's not for the person behind you. You know who it's for? It's for you. It's for me. And so although this series may have conjured up some things that have been spoken over you and it just made a real negative impact, what I want you to do is I want you to spin that around and just look at your own life and realize that your words, every word that you have spoken matters. Because you and I, we're not unlike anyone else. Like when we go ahead and communicate something that we see, I broke the window, what do? We come in with our explanations. We talk and we talk and we explain and we explain, and then we subtly blame when they don't miraculously become healed. Wait, I said I was sorry, right? I told you why I said what I said. I explained to you that's not really what I meant to say. What I meant to say is this, and if you took it the wrong way, I've done what I can do. I guess it's on you now, right? That is not what Christ has called us to do. And it's interesting because, again, we're comparing this to the physical world, right? In the physical world, when you're hurt and you're damaged, it's almost better. And I'll explain why. Have you ever been physically injured by somebody? Maybe you were playing basketball, right? It's a physical game of basketball, and so you're both going at it, and you go down with a high ankle sprain. You are 90% sure that they didn't do it on purpose, correct? Like you're playing, and it's getting really intense. You go down with the injury, and you're 90% sure they probably didn't mean this on purpose, that I would be physically hurt. But when it comes to words, when that damage is immediate in your heart, you're not so sure they didn't mean what they said. You're not so sure they didn't mean what they said because, well, they said it, and although they may not have meant for it to come out, it came out, which meant that it was inside of them. And you're not so sure that you didn't just have something revealed to you about how they really think about you, how they really value you. And this is a big deal. And it's such a big deal that James, the author of the book of James, he deals with our words. He deals with our speech. And so if you haven't figured out by now, that's your cue to turn to the book of James. Turn to James chapter 3. In James chapter 3, James is going to be talking about our speech. He's going to be talking specifically about this idea that, man, our words, it can cause so much damage and will require a lot of healing. We're going to begin reading in verse 2. James chapter 3, verse 2 begins, "We all stumble in many ways." I love how James doesn't just point the finger, but he also recognizes that he has stumbled in many ways. How many of you would also say, I have stumbled in many ways? Good, good. None of you hopefully are sitting there thinking, oh, I am the world's greatest dad. It is Father's Day. I have done this perfectly, right? None of us have. And so he's starting off on the right foot. We all have stumbled in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. In other words, what he's saying is if you can keep your mouth in check, well, you have arrived. That is the height of spiritual maturity. If you can keep your mouth in check, listen, mouth control is the ultimate self-control. And we talked about this, I believe it was week 2, how every single conversation that we enter, we have an opportunity to either make that conversation a construction zone or a demolition zone. And so what James is saying is, listen, those people that figure it out, those people that can actually control their mouth, they step into every conversation knowing it is a construction zone. And so what the words I'm going to use are the tools that I'm going to use to build something up in their life that's meaningful and significant. I'm not going to bring in the wrecking ball. I'm not going to make this a demolition zone with my words. It says that is the height of maturity. Drop down to the middle of verse 5. He continues with this. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. In just a couple months, you and I won't have to just consider and imagine, wildfires, forest fires, because we live in the United States. And isn't it true that every single year in the United States, when things get dry, things start to just catch on fire, and it's just nuts. Every single year, we have images that come across looking like this, and then we're told the story that, you know how this happened? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres. Millions and millions of dollars of houses gone up in smoke. How did it happen? Because a small little spark got outside of the campfire, and now so many people's lives have been wrecked by this fire. And we marvel, it's like, really, just a spark started all of that? James says, consider that. And then he says this, consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire. Your mouth, your words have the potential to burn. And you can burn a marriage down. You can burn a child down. You can burn the most important relationships in your life down to the ground. Now, when it comes to physical fires, there are 2 primary ways that people will fight fires. There's the containment, let's contain the fire method, and then you have the let's extinguish the fire method. Now, when we're talking about the big forest fires, when we're talking about the big wildfires, containment is almost always a strategy, right? You've got acres upon acres going up in smoke, and it just becomes too much fuel, and they're like, okay, we just got to contain this thing. And the way we do that is we got a fire break over here, and we'll drop some water over here, and we just got to contain this thing, which is a pretty good strategy, except what do we know? Once all the fuel has been spent and burnt, it leaves everything looking like this. We've got a picture of desolation. And so the problem with this strategy is you're not left with much. And if you apply this to our relationships, when we create a word fire, and we just say, hey, let's contain this thing, what's eventually probably going to happen? It's just going to burn the relationship to the ground. You're not going to have much left to build with. Instead, we need to incorporate the second strategy, which is the extinguish the fire strategy. Think about it like getting a fire in your home. Some of you, maybe you've experienced a grease fire, big flare up. Let's imagine it actually catches the kitchen curtains on fire. Are you going to go into containment mode? Are you thinking to yourself, you know, the best strategy here is we're just going to contain this fire. I've got this pitcher of water. We'll just kind of do one of these things, and it'll be locked into the corner, and we'll just be good with the containment of the fire in the kitchen. Anyone going to do that? No, you're going to what? You're going to want to extinguish that fire because you know it's not going to stay contained. It's going to destroy your whole house, and it might even move on to other people's houses. You've got to put this thing out. The problem is that in most situations, you and I, we go into containment mode before we go into let's extinguish this thing mode. Let me see if this sounds familiar. You say some hurtful words and you immediately realize, uh-oh, I broke the window. Uh-oh, I have created a word fire in their heart. And what do you immediately do? You begin to try to contain it. How? By explaining. You try to contain by explaining. What does that look like? That looks like you saying, oh, let me go ahead and try to distance myself as far away from that fire as possible because I realize that you are in flames and I know that my words started that, but I don't want to touch that fire because I don't want to get burned by that. So let me just explain away what I've just shared with you. No, that's not what I meant. That's not what, and you try to get as far away from it as possible. Meanwhile, you walk away thinking everything's good, but that relationship, that individual is burning to the ground. Proverbs gives a little bit of an insight into this. This is in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 3 says this, a prudent person foresees danger and takes precaution. As followers of Jesus, as Christians, what we do is when we see and notice a spark has just come out of our mouth and it seems as though we're creating a word fire, we're prudent. And we realize we've got to put that fire out. The foolish person, the simpleton, goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. The simpleton, the fool, decides, you know what, I'm just going to contain this with an excuse. I'm going to contain this with some explanation, and I can just kind of back away, and I'm sure we're good. That's what the fool does. But the follower of Christ, the Christian, guys, we don't just contain, we extinguish the fire. How do we do this, though? James, fortunately, doesn't leave us to wonder. James explains how we can actually begin to extinguish the word fires that we create. In James chapter 3, he continues to talk about the tongue. He continues to talk about our words. And then even he talks about wisdom. He talks about how foolish sometimes we are because we think it is wise to be selfish. And so at the end of chapter 3, starting in verse 17, he explains how we can actually begin to extinguish these word fires. Notice what he says. He says, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Which sounds beautiful, and there's a lot in it, and it's hard to unpack everything that James has just said. So what I want to do is I just want to make it really simple for us, and I want to take this idea of how we can extinguish our word fires and bring it into two words that are practical and we can apply to our lives very easily. So the two words that I think describe what James is talking about here is we need to make sure that we are humble as well as sensitive. We need to make sure that we are humble and sensitive. When I say humble, I'm talking about the word that he chose to use. He chose to use the word submit. So when we are in a moment where we recognize that we've created a word fire, sometimes we just want to distance ourselves. We want to explain it away. We want to get away from the fire that might actually cause us to get burned a little bit. The humble thing to do is not just to worry about us, but actually to worry about them. To realize, you know what, I've hurt, and I need to make sure that there's healing taking place. So I'm going to submit myself under what they need so that their needs are met, not just my own. That's the idea of humility. And then when it comes to sensitivity, listen, most of our word fires have typically been started because we've used insensitive words. Isn't that true? We've chosen to use words that were insensitive, and so fires have erupted. And so it makes sense that we can begin extinguishing those fires by using sensitive words. But that's not our go-to. Let me ask you if this sounds familiar. You recognize that the window's been broken. You recognize that there was a fire in their heart. And so what do? We say things like, I just want you to see my side of the story. I just want you to understand why I said what I said. I do not want to be misjudged in this situation. You don't know my heart here, so I want to make sure that you know my heart behind this. And there's a lot of I, and there's a lot of my, and a lot of I's, and a lot of my's is not sensitive or humble. And so we need to make sure that we are stepping into this idea of humility and sensitivity. What might this look like? What does that actually sound like? I'm going to do a little exercise with you guys. What does it sound like to actually speak words that are humble and sensitive? Well, it sounds like this. We speak the words, I'm so sorry. That's where it begins. That's not where it ends. We speak the words. We realize there's a fire, and we speak the words, I'm so sorry, but don't miss this part. Ready? Here it is. You guys catch that? You guys catch that? Johnny, can you go back to the last slide? I don't think they caught it. Okay, so we speak the words, I'm so sorry, and then we follow up with do you guys catch that now? Okay, some of you, I'm not so sure you caught it, so we're gonna practice this, because I think this might be difficult for some of you. So I'm gonna go ahead and count to 2, and then we're just gonna speak the words, I'm so sorry. You guys ready for it? Okay, here we go. 1, 2, I'm so sorry. Very good. I'm not sure though. So we're gonna do it one more time. Okay, here we go. On to 1, 2. I'm so sorry. That was good. Now, some of you are looking at me and you're thinking to yourself, okay, Jonathan, what is the difference between the lame, I'm so sorry, Pablo, I broke your arm, it was an accident, we're all okay, right? What is different between that really lame, explanation, apology, and that really lame apology? Okay, I'll tell you what the difference is. We are not going to assume that lame apology, I'm so sorry, is actually going to immediately heal anything. See, we're going to assume that we need to actually begin to live out and practice the principles that we've been talking about all throughout this series. And I know some of you, the I'm so sorry period, you can't do that. You could not do that because you have to speak more words. 3 words? 3 words? No, I got to speak more than just 3 words. So if you're tempted to say anything more, because here's the thing. The reason why that period exists is because anything that comes after that period is going to sound an awful lot like an explanation. And explaining excuses, that's not sensitive, that's not humble. And so what we're going to do is if we have to say anything after this, we're just going to double down on what we already said. We're going to say, I'm so sorry for the words that I spoke to you. We can double down. I'm so sorry for the words I spoke to you. You did not deserve that. I'm so sorry for the words that I spoke to you. You did not deserve that. And again, I'm so sorry. Just double down on it. Because again, when we start to say anything after that, it's going to sound like we're making excuses, that we're explaining, just distancing ourselves from the situation. Instead, what are we going to do? We're going to go back to our own heart and say, what frequency have I been communicating in? What are some of the rhythms in my life? I'm going to ask the question, what is it like on the other side of me? Typically, what is my knee-jerk reaction? Okay, I clearly am not in the frequency of God in most situations, or at least when this happens, and so I'm going to begin every single morning in the frequency of God by meditating on His truth and allowing His truth to inform my heart and my mind and my mouth. What am I going to do? I'm going to start loading up on the positive words that are coming out of my mouth, and in hopes that I'm so sorry, you did not deserve that, will actually lead eventually to the healing. Because what do we know? Guys, damage can be immediate, but the healing, it requires time. Let me share with you just 3 things. While we're practicing the principles that we just shared, we're also not going to do 3 other things, okay? There's 3 things that we're not going to do because it's not sensitive and it's not humble. The first thing that we're not going to do is we're not going to tell them how bad we feel. Have you ever been there? Maybe someone else said some things and they were like, I feel so horrible, I feel so bad. We're not going to do that. You know why we're not going to do that? On one hand, you should feel bad. And so it just becomes redundant that you're telling them that you feel bad. But more importantly, we're not going to do that because when we say, I feel so bad, what we're asking for is empathy. So I've just wrecked you with my words. Can you please empathize with how bad I feel about wrecking you with my words? Do you see how insensitive you see how not humble that is? We're not going to do that. Second, this does not apply to every relationship, but it applies to really close relationships. We're not going to ask for a hug. You ever have someone do that? Like they just clocked you in the jaw with their words, and then they're like, hey, bring it in for a hug. Can I? Why do we do that? Why are we tempted to do that? We're tempted to do that because we recognize that emotionally there is distance. And we don't like that there is emotional distance. And so what do we ask for? We ask for the closeness to be physical. But you are not in a position to ask for closeness with physical because you just gut punch them with your words. They need some time to heal from that and to know that you are trustworthy. One of the other things that we're not going to do is we're not going to ask for and we're not going to assume that there is going to be immediate reconciliation. Like we're not going to do the, hey, I said I'm so sorry. Do the Christian thing now. Forgive me for what I just did. We're not going to assume that immediately we can have reconciliation. Why? Because you just took something from them. You took their trust. You took maybe their self-worth and their dignity. And so we are in no position to ask for anything. Instead, what do? We go back to what we've been talking about throughout this series, and we just continue to apply it to their lives. We continue to load up on the positive. We continue to speak in the frequency of God. And the hope is that as we do that and we allow the time for healing, that yes, indeed, there would be some reconciliation that takes place. In Matthew, we've read this verse several times before. Jesus explains his mission on our planet. In Matthew chapter 20, verse 28, he says, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus says, I've come to serve, not to be served. And we need to have that same mindset. And so what I want you to do is I want you to ask yourself 3 questions as we move into application today. The first question is this. Is there anyone at home who has been crushed by your words recently? Think about the people in your life, in your home. Has there been anybody that's been crushed by your words recently? Second, is there anyone in your neighborhood? Is there anyone at work? Is there anyone in your friendship groups? Is there anyone here at church that has been crushed by your words recently? And then the third question, is there a fire you've tried to contain by explaining that you need to extinguish? And if you can answer yes to any of these questions, I hope the application is obvious. The application is don't just contain, start to extinguish the word fire that your words created in the first place. And for some of you, that's going to be really difficult. And the reason why it's going to be so difficult is because the people that you need to extinguish a word fire, well, they're sitting right next to you. It's going to be really awkward because they're actually sitting in front of you. They're sitting behind you. They're sitting somewhere in this auditorium, and you're thinking to yourself, wait, I don't know if I can actually humble myself enough to go to them because they're going to know I'm only doing this. I'm only doing this because Jonathan told me to. So it's going to require an extra dose of humility. But that's what creates the opportunity for the word fire to be extinguished in the first place. And I think it's very healthy for us to be real open and honest and say, listen, when Jonathan was talking, when we were reading those scriptures, I really just felt the conviction of God, and I realized that I need to communicate something to you. I am so sorry for the words that I communicated to you back when whatever. Period. Leave it at that. If you need to say anything more, double down. You did not deserve that. Double down. Now, that is not something that I ever wanted to make you feel. I think I started a fire. I'm so sorry. Period. That's it. Leave it. Anything else is going to sound like an explanation. Is that going to be difficult for some of you? Yeah, absolutely. But some of you have created some word fires, and you've been trying to contain it. But Jesus says, listen, you don't just contain, you extinguish the word fire. So I challenge you to live that same attitude that Christ had. Not in a situation where we're just going to look to be served by our family, our church family, our neighbors, but we take the step to actually serve others the way Christ has served us. Let's pray. Lord God, we thank you. We thank you for this day, this opportunity. It's Father's Day. It's an opportunity to honor our earthly dads, but it's an opportunity to honor you, our Heavenly Father, who sent your Son so that we could live life and life to the full. And we know we've been damaged maybe by a father or two in our lives, whether that was our biological father or maybe a stepdad, potentially maybe an in-law. But God, I just pray that we would experience today a reminder of your grace, that you extinguish it with your servant's heart. And I pray that we would extend it to those around us. I pray this all in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.